The key to commanding the room with executives is to have executive presence, but a lot of definitions around executive presence that I've seen are frankly not holistic. It's not just about communicating confidently or looking the part. No, there's much more to it. What people are not telling you about executive presence is this. Executive presence is the ability to make executives feel the way you want them to feel after any interaction with them. The reality is you need your executive to feel confident in a new initiative you're proposing. You need them to believe in your research, and you need them to believe in you. After talking with dozens of HR professionals, managers, and even practicing some of these tips that I'm about to tell you myself, I've arrived at 3 key takeaways to improving your own executive presence at your company. You need to understand your executive's primary interests. The key here is that executive presence is not a one-size-fits-all. You need to understand each executive's primary interests and tailor your message accordingly to fit their needs. Oftentimes, an executive's interests are deeply aligned with their function. For example, an SVP of growth is going to probably care a lot about a business initiative that widens top-of-funnel user acquisition at lower costs. A head of sales will likely care about meeting quarterly goals, building relationships with strategic customers, and minimizing revenue cannibalization. A chief product officer may want to accelerate virality and engagement within the products while also trying to hire the best R&D talent. The best way to understand your executive's primary interests is to simply ask them. Now, it's hard enough to get one-on-one time with execs, so you may need to get one-on-ones with their direct reports or people on their team. But a great question to ask them is, what keeps you up at night related to work? Or what are some core projects that take up most of your mind share? I'd love to better understand those because then maybe I can align my projects closer to your priorities as well. Another issue is that most people just dive straight into their presentation as though it's just one-way communication, but that's not how you should handle it. To capture their attention, I recommend that you summarize your core message within 45 seconds when you kick off the meeting, and then ask for a particular executive by calling them out by their name if they have any call-outs or questions or key concerns that you should address up front. This method helps you quickly gauge the vibe of the room and understand where your executives are so that you can tailor your message to meet their needs. Another key is to adapt to your executive's preferred communication style. Again, the key point here is that executive presence is not a one-size-fits-all. For communication, it comes down to 2 things. The first is understanding your executive's preferred communication channel, and the second is to understand your executive's preferred way of thinking. So on channel, for example, some executives prefer slides with little text and lots of diagrams because they're visual learners. Some prefer digging into financial models and spreadsheets with clear assumptions outlined. Others may want all the context and detail in a Word document so that everyone can come in and collaborate and share feedback more easily asynchronously. I've even seen some executives prefer working in digital whiteboards in order to brainstorm more effectively and achieve consensus more easily. Executives are just simply too busy to spend extended time with you. So you need to learn how to craft your messages concisely enough over email or Slack as well. Communication channels should not be constant 100% of the time. It will vary depending on your executive's needs, the particular initiative at hand, who else is involved in this project, and the timing. And the second key is to align with your executive's way of thinking. For example, some executives are very much data-driven decision makers, so lead with an impactful statistic to get their buy-in. Some prefer thinking in frameworks, so apply a framework to your proposal and walk your executive through it. Some executives particularly care about maintaining great cross-departmental relationships, so sometimes it's helpful to create a spreadsheet or a stakeholder map to just show everyone how this initiative will affect each department accordingly. Some executives prefer coming to meetings very prepared, so send them pre-read materials at least 24 hours in advance, and then when the meeting starts, allow them to fire off with questions and share their concerns that you can address right away. And others just like you to spoon feed them the content and just wing it because they don't want to come in prepared. The final takeaway is KISS. Keep it simple and stupid. There's a common misperception out there that the more senior your audience is, the more details and research you want to share to sound more impressive in front of them. But the reality is your executives don't want that because they're, one, really low on time, Two, they have tons of meetings that they have to go back and forth between, so they're constantly context switching. And three, they have hundreds of decisions to make, and likely, especially if you're junior in your career, you just won't matter that much to them. Consequently, you need to design your message to accomplish two things. The first is that they're just up to speed, and the second is that they understand your ask within ideally 30 seconds, depending on the medium. In a slide deck, for example, it helps to have an executive summary so that your executives can just read that single slide to get on the same page and don't have to read through everything else. Via email or Slack, you want to provide enough context in a line or two, then provide the immediate ask up front, and then offer some additional context afterwards in that order, because they're going to want to know what the ask is immediately. I've particularly found that it's helpful to bold your ask and bullet the context so that it's easier for them to read. In a live meeting, you'll likely want to start off by articulating the desired outcomes of the meeting, providing a little bit of context and immediately getting their input on something. Here are 4 major tips that I've found super successful to engage with executives during live meetings. The first is to call out your executive by their name and ask for their input. Too often, you ask questions into the void without specifying who should actually answer, and that leads to awkward silences. So keep your questions super simple and ask a particular executive for their point of view. The second is to ask your executive how much they understand about the topic you're about to cover before you even begin to present. You'll meet your audience where they are, and this is helpful because one, it'll help you understand how much more context you'll need to provide, and secondly, your executives will appreciate that you asked for their input early. The third is to ask your executives to air out all of their concerns and questions top of mind up front. By addressing these in the beginning, you'll effectively disarm them when it comes time to actually presenting your argument. The fourth takeaway is to prepare your manager and your colleagues with clear roles during this meeting. For example, you might want to tell your manager to provide color in certain areas because it'll add more credibility to your own message. It's so easy to get mired in the details of a project that you've been working on for a long time. So what I like to do is to think, how do I get the 1,000-foot view of my project? And a great way to do that is ask a colleague or friend of yours at the company with very little understanding or context to go through your materials or presentation and get their opinion. Now, there isn't a great course that immediately teaches you how to master executive presence because, again, it all depends on the audience. But you can develop a great foundation. And to get more weekly tips on how to improve your communication, your executive presence, and your charisma and confidence at work, subscribe to my newsletter at prestonchin.co, where you'll get weekly communication tips to elevate your impact at work. And if you're interested, you can also get coaching too to really take your EP to the next level.